we will see a few dead unicorns in the next year.
Agree.
First word that comes to mind when I say Cloudnine.
Euphoria.
Rahul Yadav.
Really?
We'll go with that. Co-founder conflicts.
Happens.
Artificial intelligence.
I think here to stay.
Entrepreneurship.
Tough.
I think all of these experiences kind of put together, right? It boils down to what kind of a leader you will become, because most of the founders starting up now, right? You're relatively young. You don't know what it's like to be a leader. You don't know how you will respond in a particular situation, right? Unless you're kind of put into it. That's when like the real thing comes out. I actually wanted to ask you this. I think last year or something when we met, somehow we got into other conversations. You were at Cloudnine when COVID hit, right?
Yes.
What was, as a leader, right, in that kind of, because that's almost like a wartime situation, right, with the kind of people
zero playbook,
right, there's zero playbook, exactly, right? So all of your experiences, right, whether that's a big fund or this or that, every experience in your life kind of boils down to that moment, right? And that kind of happens for everybody at some point in their life, right? It can happen for a special forces soldier at a crunch situation, right?
Yep.
Everything comes together at that point. I wanted to think what that situation was like for you, because a lot of people kind of came around. So as a leader, how do you basically brace yourself for that situation, and how do you get the team to come around?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, it was, and you know, it was doubly more compounded for us because we were frontline, right? So you had to stay open, you had to kind of continue what you were doing.
Plus maternity, right? So if there were
you can't stop.
At that point,
you can't stop. Yeah, you can't say, listen, come back next week. Doesn't happen, right? So, no, it was very challenging, and the complexity again was because we had multiple centers across the country. Each state had a different way of looking at it. Each zone had a different way depending on the outbreak there, and you know, the situation was evolving so fast. I think it all came down to unification of how the team had to be, you know, rallied around this. I'm indebted or whatever the word is, grateful to a next level on my CEO who was there at that time, Ravi. Fantastic guy to be able to kind of, you know, look through the situations and exactly. So we had war rooms every day, right? Because you had to kind of figure out what's happening. How do you kind of do this? You cannot think of anything as normal. You have to start thinking of team first, that if someone falls sick, what are you going to do, right? If someone falls sick and they are part of the caregiving team to someone else, how do you then restrict, right? Again, because of not having a playbook, this was very, very hard to kind of even simulate and understand. So we've gone overboard on certain things. We probably were underprepared on some things, and you know, this was. And the team which sees through some of these things, I think the unification is just profound. Like the team which has survived the entire episode today, I think are you know hard like diamonds today, right? It's just fantastic to see that. But at that time, honestly, it was just trusting each other to say that we're doing the right thing, or you know, we're doing the best that we can. It was. And again, grateful to a superb board who said that, look, leave everything aside, do what is important, right? So it was actually very, very important to, again, I keep saying the first principles that you kind of go into and say, what is the reason for existence? We had, I think at that time, close to 3,000, employees, and maybe about another 1,200 or on a slightly around that number on a primary employer obligation. So it was a large number to look after, right? So one outbreak, and that time was locked the whole thing down, right? You can't survive like that. So it was tough, man. And you know, we all keep saying that we've become wiser. I don't know. Nobody wants to see the situation again. But yeah, I think it all boiled down to the team. It just boiled down to the team.
It's also how you respond to it, right? Because you don't know. At that point in time, there were people who literally didn't know if there was a tomorrow.
Correct.
Right. And there's an author who I read a lot, and I've invited him to the podcast. I don't know if he's responded until now, but his name is Ryan Holiday.
Okay.
Right. He writes a lot about stoicism and things like that. and he writes about Stoic philosophies, and he basically distills them, right? About people like Marcus Aurelius, right? And my brother and me, have been listening to him for like the last few years now, right? We have a bust of Marcus Aurelius on our desk and all of that. But there's a coin, right, which says memento mori.
Okay.
If you turn it around, it says you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you think or say or do.
Right.
Right. I think COVID was a point where, and especially for the people who were at the front line, right? It's like you could see that, right?
Yeah.
You could leave life right now. So you know what? All the money, all the riches, everything that you've made in life, it doesn't matter because you're trying to just save the person in front of you.
Correct.
Right? It kind of has this way of concentrating, and that's nature, right? It kind of brings into focus what is really important.
Yeah.
Right.
Look, the existential crisis became real.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody had to kind of go back and understand exactly like you said, why are you doing what you're doing?
Correct.
Right. And sometimes it's a way of getting by. Sometimes it's a reason to be there at that time to do it. Right. So I think it was a huge reality check, right? And I think to all the ones who survived and thrived and are here to kind of look at a better future tomorrow, I think everyone's definitely wiser of how do you kind of look at some of these things. But some of those trends are also falling away, given that I closely follow healthcare trends.
Right.
We were at a large discussion that we were hosting just yesterday, and there was this huge spike on everything from an adoption point of view, on preventive, on digital adoption of healthcare and everything. Slowly see that going back to what it was before COVID. So you're like, now we're fine, nothing's gonna happen.
You should have given the EdTech guys a call. They would have told you, it's gonna go down, right? But now that we've taken a turn for the philosophical, right? I have a few questions for you.
Okay.
And this is stuff that you have spoken about. I found a post which was beautiful in its own way, right? And there's these 5 points that you had made, right? About your, I would say, ruminations about life and reflections, right? And I want to talk about them, right? There's about 5 of them. We start with this. The first one: money can be pooled, but time is no one's. What do you mean by that?
It was during COVID again, to kind of talk about how individuals mattered, right? Because we were seeing a lot of people getting out of action because of what the situation was.
Right.
There was a lot of money available.
Right.
It was not going to solve anything, right? So it was about that, to say that how do you kind of still continue to do what you're doing.
Right.
And it was just a reflection on that. So
very similar thing that Naval Ravikant says, right?
Yeah.
That forget the money, guard your time.
Yeah.
Right, because that's the only thing that all of us have finite amount of, right?
Correct.
Money is something that you can't take with you, right?
And on an everyday basis, right? Even now, like I said, even now, we don't think about it, right? It's in the past, right? It's something that we all lived through. What are those things which again bring about the individualistic traits, right? I think everyone needs to kind of sometimes be able to reflect that. And I think in our culture, we don't have the time to pause and reflect.
Absolutely.
We don't enjoy that. We don't cherish that. We don't educate that. We don't encourage that, right? So I think that is something we kind of need to keep going back to, right? And it's across everything. While you're studying, while you're working, while you're building something, while you're enabling something, I think that is very important to understand where each one lies, right? So
there's a very interesting story, and I've been reading about. So I'm a big World War II buff, right? So I've kind of read a lot about what happened to post-war Japan, right? So when my parents went, I was like, oh, watch this, right? And they came back. They didn't tell me about like the monuments and things. The entire conversation was about people.
Yeah.
Right. Their mindset was that, look, our generation before this did some really evil things, and we repented. But now the way of life in Japan is that nothing I do or say should inconvenience another human being, right? And this, one of the guides was telling them that, look, I don't know where my child is, right? In terms, they're coming back from school. This is an example. If it's raining, right? Every child has a tag, right? Any car will stop. They'll give the parent a call saying that, look, I found your kid walking in the rain, so I'm dropping them home.
Yeah.
Right? She's telling another story, which was that, can you imagine that if you're going past a cemetery and there is, every grave has flowers on it. How is that possible?
Hmm.
It's not, right? But that happens in Japan. The reason is that, so this guy tells my parents that my father's grave is some 300-400 miles away. I go there maybe once in 4 months. But what happens is that when I go there, I clean his grave, I put some flowers, and as many as possible around that, right? I do the same because somebody else's relatives probably can't come there, and I do that in the cemetery here as well, right? So that I know that there is somebody else looking out for my father and putting flowers there, right? This is after death. So I think there's a lot of cultural growth, and we are a very rich society that way. But I think value of life, value of things, right? Beyond the monetary aspect, it is something that we are still kind of coming up with, because think of us, right? We are such a young society, so we do behave in a certain way. That's a more mature society, aging population and all that. But think of the nuanced things that are coming out of there. This thing, it's just a very interesting observation.
No, obviously, like I think the best outcomes are actually driven by war stories, right? I'm not saying literal war, but in a situation like a war, I think most people are, you're always able to relate to something like that only when you've gone through something like that, right? So if there is a generation which is growing up without any of those inconsistencies in life, it's very difficult to understand what hardships are, right? Or how do you repent for something else which happened which is not in your control, right? So I think it's very real, and I had the opportunity to visit Japan not very recently, but maybe about 6-7 years back. Blown away with the hospitality and just the genuine kindness with the people that they are. And when you read it in isolation of what all the situations that happened across all the things that they did around, like, are these the same people? Right? So it's
So I was telling my wife this, right? I was like, before we have a kid, I really want that we should be able to go to Japan, right? I know it's why, right? And she gave me that look because that is a side story. I'll come back to that. But my stance was that, look, you want to give your child the best, everything that you've learned. And I think that there's a part of humanity that's underrated, right? About how they've kind of come away from a catastrophe and come out positive out of it, right? So I think that is something that we all need to learn from, and that can only happen if you go there.
Yeah.
Right. So we're figuring it out. But yeah, the number 2 thing, right? Vision is necessary, but mission is supreme.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's about saying that everybody always starts with something aspirational, right? It's something which is probably beyond reach, but it all comes down to execution, right? So it was a little take on that to say that hey, can you kind of, and this is where great founders outshine others, right? To kind of be able to do the storytelling in such a profound way that you translate that vision into executable missions, right? So that is what, at that time, I mean, you're asking me tough questions, but that's what the relatability that I had to say that, that is what I was trying to get at, to say that, that is more important. And again, put it down to everything that you see today. It's also a similar aspect to kind of look at, while I keep telling every founder that people say TAM is low, TAM is this. It's like, dude, I am not anyone to question what TAM can be. It's as big as your imagination, right? It's about how do you go execute it and how do you get it done, right? So it's about that, right? Who are we to say that there's no TAM for the VR thing that Apple decided to bring about at a prohibitively expensive price? They know something which we don't, right? And they're good at execution. So maybe they will create something where eventually the price will come down, it becomes a household item, and imagine they've got a paradigm shift in everything we know as, how we consume entertainment, content, information, gaming. Maybe that's what it is getting to, right? So
I think the TAM conversation is very interesting because if you look at it, right, $3.5 trillion economy, TAM is low for most things, right? Unless you're in the consumer space and things like that. There are things where it's difficult to justify, right? Even if you look at B2B SaaS in India, right? But the thing is that this is where I differ from a lot of other managers as well. I was like that you can't not want to invest, right? Because the market will deepen, right? 3.5 trillion goes to 10 trillion. How much of that is going to come towards this side, right? Towards the more technological or digital side. That means that it'll consequently it will deepen, right? But yeah, I think
Avnish had summed this up really, really well to say that look, the 3.5 trillion of where we are today
yes,
is a compound effect of the last 75 years. And now we're saying if we're going to be at 5 trillion in the next 4 years, you can imagine the sheer pressure of how you can how that scaling needs to happen.
Correct.
Right? It's not going to be one public market. It's not going to be one private alternatives market. It has to be a combined effort across, right? Which means consumers have to grow up, providers have to grow up, internet has to go up, or everything else has to. It's just the magnitude when you think of it that way is just so profound, right?
Okay, number 3. Having talent is great, but showing intent is paramount.
Dude, you're killing me, man. Yeah, I mean it's again. So I like to kind of. I've stopped writing. I need to start again.
I wish everybody, all my guests did this, man. It would make my life so much easier. I know your life principles.
Yeah, so this was actually to say that you may not be the most sought out person to actually carry out that job, but the fact is to show up, right? It was about to say that you can act. The intent to actually show that I care to get it done is more important than the ability to get it done, because over a period of time it'll pan out.
Correct.
Right? So it was more for that. I think it was possibly to kind of look at things which were, I don't know at what time I wrote that, but it was probably to do with some macro environment sort of thing where people are giving you a lot of lip service but possibly not translating it into actual work, right? And there are a lot of people who are doing that actual work without paying heed to that lip service. So it's probably because of that. I usually put a narration also. Why am I putting that quote out?
I didn't find the narrations. Alright, the 4th one. Initiation needs credit, but execution deems merit. I really like this one.
Yeah. This was again, I think, very similar. I think it was to my, to say that, while, again, as founders, right, it is easy to kind of say that, okay, let's go get this done. But it requires an army to also kind of get some of those things done, right? Because you're not omnipresent. You can't do things everywhere. And again, it compounds when you are trying to execute something from a, let's say, a remote environment. When I say remote, in the sense you are not across all these things, right? In the service that we are, it's a very touch and feel business, right? But you can't be there in all places at once. So how do you kind of, make this the mission critical purpose for everybody, right? Again, as I keep rolling back, the biggest founder quality that I look for, and I'm trying to instill that in everybody else, is to say that you need to be able to storytell your vision. You need to be able to do that. Otherwise, you just won't be able to sell it. I know a lot of great guys who are exceptional thinkers, exceptional ideators, but you just can't tell another person how do you get it done, right? Or you can't even jam with someone to say that how do you even think of getting it done. It may be the worst idea possible, right? But to even have someone come and correlate, contribute, see if you can build it together, it's a real art, right? So I think the good founders will consistently be the guys who can actually do a lot of micro in terms of knowing where each and every levers are, but you also have to keep going back to macro and saying, how do I take this across, right? So it was actually I'm thinking back that it's probably related to that.
But that's a very good point, right? How do you look at the so you don't want to miss the trees for the forest or forest for the trees, right? Because people right now are very amazed about for example the venture capital environment, right? I'm not. I mean I'm not because I know where in the cycle we are, right? When I raised the first fund, right, I knew when I was raising it, right, I was raising it at a zero interest rate environment. I know it was easier to get, but I did know the cycle's going to turn.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying that I knew to what magnitude it would turn.
Yep.
But it would, right?
Winter kept coming.
Yeah. And the idea is that somebody who actually falls well into this this line, right, is going to be any founder who's saying that, look, I need to grow. This is the time to raise capital, right? This is the time to hunker down, right? The thing was that the sugar rush was that, hey, I can get capital anytime, right? But that's not true. You can get capital now because of the environment. You might not be able to get it in 2 months or 5 months or 9 months, right? I think the smarter guys actually took that capital and tried to hunker down, right? Bottom line, focus, all of that. So I think it's a very interesting way to kind of you look at a founder, right? Hey, you can look at the big picture, but don't miss the trees for the forest, so to say.
Yeah. No, look, I think as a general rule of thumb in the space that we are in, right? You have to imagine even for outcomes, let's say for fund managers like us, it's going to be long tail, right? It's not something. We'll be like super lucky to kind of find something in the next 1 year which will give you like outsized returns, right? So you are in a long tail business,
Right.
which means you will see cycles, right?
Correct.
You have to prep founders, and the good quality founders also know this. And I think the usefulness of a time like this is where people go back to first principles to say that, why am I building what I'm building, right? It's to say that it's not because I can get capital. Make no mistake, even today great founders continue to corner capital, right? It's not like there isn't capital. Everyone's being a bit more wise or choosy about who they want to give it to, right? So
Right.
I think those ones, people who are building on that, knowing that there will be cycles which will come, how do you kind of ride some of those things when times are down? How do you kind of survive when times are good? How do you kind of ride that wave? I think those are the ones which will actually do well, and
Right.
I think it's our duty to kind of also educate a lot of these guys that this is a great time to build. If you know why you are building, if there is a genuine semblance of saying that it's either going to create a specific mind space in the space of a consumer, or there is a genuine rationale of unit level economics where this will continue to sustain capital or
Right.
not, I think it's a great time to build.
Right. I'm gonna. This is a sidebar question, but I'm gonna address it here, right? Which is that, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. There's a camp which right now feels that you know the entire startup ecosystem, the industry, the founders, a lot of it is fraud, right? And there's a lot of fraud happening, right? There are others who might be on the other side that no, there's nothing. I don't know if they are, but there's a part which is in the middle, which somewhere where I lie, right? Where I do feel there is definite mismanagement, right? But there is also an element of fraud, right? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think we like to call it as a cleanse environment at this time. I think not to quote Thanos and Marvel in this, but the weak will wither away. And
Right.
if it's unsustainable business model, if it is frivolous sort of revenues and not verifiable kind of actual avenues of what you're doing, those will get called out, right?
Right.
I think it's in every founder's interest to actually be able to say that, listen, this is really why this business needs to exist, right? Or this is why somebody needs to be building it this way, right? I think you will possibly get away with some of these inconsistencies in a bull market because capital will still come your way, and possibly the metrics that someone looks at from a ability to kind of go back someone is probably more top-ended than the bottom-ended.
Right.
But I think, for like I keep saying, the quality of entrepreneurs that we are seeing today are just amazing because it's
Absolutely.
so focused to say that I'm building this across the levers, right?
Right.
Which is fantastic to see. I think you will see a lot of these things coming out, and again, I don't see how it's any different from what has happened in public markets, what has happened in large companies. It happens, right? Things get called out. So private, in our country especially, think of how old is the private alternatives capital market ecosystem, right? And
Yeah.
compare it to the rest of the things that the country has seen. It is infant, right? You will see infants making mistake. It's not to say that the child is bad and throw the entire thing out, right? It will have inconsistencies. It's
Behaves
on
like a
a
teenager.
yeah, and it's on all of us to kind of actually call that out in a way and actually talk about things which went bad,
Right.
which went bad, right? So I mean, all of us should actually be talking about failures a lot more.
Correct.
It's not just about, and we were discussing this before, to say that it's not about saying that, listen, I raised a certain X of capital, right? It is always about saying that, hey, what are you doing about it, right? To celebrate successes as outcomes rather than something which has come with a lot of pressure to say that now you go build, now you have to prove what you are actually talking about, right? So I think some of those things will probably take a little bit of a change to actually go through, and you've seen Western markets doing this really well. And again, one other caveat is to say that this is not just India, man. This happens everywhere. We've seen it happening across Southeast Asia, China. You've seen it happening even I mean, there's great documentaries out there in the US which
Yeah.
talks about a lot of these things. It happens.
My only point here, right, and that's the very important thing that you said, was that it needs to be addressed. It needs to be formally addressed. I'll tell you why. Because we're on the early stage game, right? We try to make our case to our LPs about why an investment should happen, right? And the asset class is just about kind of coming of age.
Yeah.
Was coming of age, right? My fear is that the more things burn down and there's an asterisk of fraud attached to it, right? We'll have a lot of people, even before they've kind of got their confidence
Tried
in the
it,
asset
yeah,
class,
shying away from
right?
it,
Losing that confidence,
Yeah.
right? To my opinion, to my mind, I think that is a dangerous precedent, right? Unless we kind of take that head on, that look, this will not be tolerated, right? It's going to be a problem. How else do you get even more risk capital coming into the country, right? Even if you have to get it from the outside. So add to that our taxation structures, etc., right? People will be like, damn, never mind, right? I'll go to the public markets because it's cleaner, compliant, it's more
Liquid,
compliant,
yeah.
and I don't have to. Yeah, if I look at it on a long-term basis, right? Post tax, I'll pretty much make the same, right? So I think when you look at it from that lens, right, you realize that look, it's not just about one company and oh, this one put so much money, so it's their money lost.
Ecosystem at
Right?
large,
What
yeah.
people don't understand is that it's not the fund's money that's lost, right?
Yep.
They're people who back the fund,
Yep.
right? And as fund managers, we have to look them in the eye and say that yeah, we screwed up,
Yeah.
right? We didn't evaluate for integrity or whatever that reason was, right? I think that accountability is something. Again, it's also part of the process.
It is. I think it is an evolution, right?
Yeah.
I think we will always look up to the likes of some of these guys who've been here, done that as fund managers, to also show us the way in how they go about doing it, right?
Right.
I think we will all learn from it, and we'll probably get wiser. My co-founder partner at one of the co-founder partner at Peer Capital is, he comes with a huge background of diligence, right? We're still not resting on our laurels to say that we've done great amount of diligence to kind of say that we know everything that each one would
Yeah.
do, but it's also to say that we know enough to say that how do you kind of ask some of those tricky questions to say that why are they doing what they're doing, right? It's
Right.
also about those soft nudges. It's about you can't be extremely hands off in
Yeah.
something like this, right? Especially early stage when you are helping them build, right? So it's about trying to calibrate some of these things. But I think you're right. There is no point in keeping these in tightly locked cupboards, right? You
Yeah.
have to talk about it.
Absolutely.
That's the best way. Yeah.
We're gonna go back to your life lessons, right? And this last one is actually something that I've thought about a lot, right? And I should say thank you for this because I kind of read this on your profile about some time back, right? But it's helped me in the situation that I was in the last couple of weeks. And the fifth point is noise can sometimes be low, but voice needs to always rise above.
Yeah. I have no freaking clue why I wrote that.
I think you wrote it for me, man.
Yeah. No, it's again. Look, these were all reflections and possibly things that I was possibly going through as well. It's to say that one, you need to kind of listen to yourself again. I think the first principles, and I probably used this phrase too many times in this dialogue already, but I think you have to kind of find that inner voice as well to kind of say that, listen, what are you here for, right? And that is not something which will, somebody will come and tell you. You will have a lot of good people around you who are telling you how to make sense of it and whatnot, but I think you still need to kind of rise above all of those things, right? And which is why I'm saying that there will be good and bad of everything that we see. But I think we have to kind of figure out what it means for each one of us, right? So it's probably a reflection on that. And as a founder, as a large enterprise that you're building, you go through so much of challenges every day that I don't know why I wrote some of these things, but yeah, you're putting me on the spot there. But yeah, it's probably a reflection of that.
No, that was actually very refreshing to hear. All right, that was our conversation, Rohit. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, man. Enjoyed it myself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Summing up our conversation with Rohit with 3 top takeaways. Number 1, knowing what you don't know is going to have an outsized impact on your career trajectory. On the same lines, The ability to take feedback is a skill. It will dictate how far you can go. Number 2, the VC founder relationship is as good as a marriage. Like every good one, the best ones are wherein both partners feed off of each other and contribute to one another's growth. Number 3, there's a distinction between being an entrepreneur and being a leader. You find your chops as a leader when there is no playbook. Becoming a good leader is a necessary condition for being a good entrepreneur. We hope you enjoyed this episode of First Unicorn Chats. We look forward to seeing you next Friday.